stories of chemistry. And thanks to Michael, we have this perfect vessel for making a powerful brew. So here's the stories that come forth. The first is a story about a man who from a very early age had a problem with anger. So finally he was guided to a Sufi master who gave him the following advice. Go to the crossroads and sit there and greet anyone who comes along and offer them a glass of refreshing water. So the man took up his stance at the crossroads, and he did just what he was advised to do. Everyone he came past he greeted and offered a glass of refreshing water. After some long while, people began to see him as someone quite special, an ascetic who was following some religious or spiritual practice. Day after day he greeted all those who came past and offered them a glass of refreshment. But then one day a man came hurrying by, and when our man greeted him and offered him the usual refreshment, he took absolutely no notice at all and just hurried along his way. So our man jumped up from his position, took his bow and arrow from the tree under which he was sitting and shot the traveller in his back through his heart. It was discovered that this hurrying man was a known assassin on his way to conduct another heinous crime. The second story is the story of that demon who lived in a high hill beside a valley. Now, every traveller that came by, he consumed, so it was no wonder that he was quite lonely. He longed for company, but everyone who came by he devoured, so there was no chance of companionship. But he would look down in the valley below, where there was nestled a monastery, and he could hear the temple bells. He could even see in the distance the monks as they came out about their duties. And he thought to himself, perhaps if I become a monk, I will have company. I won't be lonely any more. So he decided to make his way down the mountain and approach the abbot of the monastery, which he did. And when he did, and he stated his case that he wanted to be accepted into the monastery, well, the first thought that the abbot had was, oh my goodness, a holy demon. What kudos that would bring to our monastery. But he said to the demon, well, yes, but you know, I have to submit your application to our council. So could you come back in a week and I'll tell you whether you've been accepted or not. But the demon acknowledged this and was about to get up to leave when the abbot said to him, "But well, if you don't mind my saying, those horns of yours would get in the way of our conical haps. So do you think you might be able to do something about them before you join us?" So the demon went away and went back to his lair and took a little razor and started to pare down his horns. Well, of course, this was a very, very painful process when he had these two little stumps, bleeding stumps on the top of his head. But anyway, he put up with the pain of this and went down to the abbot the next week. The abbot said, "Oh, this is very good. Now you'll be able to wear your conical hat. But the council is still out on whether that you can be accepted or not. Could you come back in another week?" And as he was leaving, the abbot said, "Well, just about those fangs of yours. They're going to get in the way when you're eating the food that we offer here. Do you think that you could do something about those fangs before you come down again?" So the demon went off again, and of course, with very great difficulty, he extracted his two fangs from out of his mouth, very painfully, leaving bleeding holes in his jaw, which throbbed mercilessly over the coming days. So after a week he came down, and the abbot said, yes, the council is still deciding, but could you come back in one more week and we'll give you a decision? Well, the poor demon, with his throbbing head and his painful jaws, had to accept this. But just as he was leaving, said, and the abbot said, "Oh, but by the way, those claws of yours are going to get in the way of, when you're eating your bowl of gruel. Do you think you could do something about those claws?" So the demon went off and very painfully cut all his claws off, so that there again was just bleeding little holes. He was in great pain and agony. But when he came down the mountain to the abbot said, good news, you've been accepted into our monastery. You will be one of us." And he was led to a little cell where each monk had their little straw mat and their little pallet on which they slept. Well, in the coming days, the demon would go to the meditation hall and sit there with his head and his mouth and his declawed hands throbbing and awfully. And when it came to eating the gruel that the monks were given, he just couldn't stomach this at all. He was in great agony. It could absolutely be seen that he was deteriorating fast. He was getting paler and thinner and so forth. So it finally came to the state where he could not even leave his cell. He was in such pain and agony and so pallid and wan. Well, the monks and the abbot left him to it. Of course, they didn't disturb him at all. And over a few days, an amazing thing began to happen. The demon put his hand up on his head and he could feel two little stumps growing. His horns were growing back. And his mouth was getting better because he could feel his fangs were coming down. And when he looked at his claws, there they were coming out again. So he started to scratch them on the straw mat, sharpen them up a little bit. And after a week or two, he was really, although feeling very, very weak, he was feeling more like his old self. And then all of a sudden he woke up one day and he felt so good. So he opened the door, and there were a couple of monks walking down the cloister. Sharpened his claws and went over and devoured both of it. Oh, it was absolutely delicious. And then, of course, as he walked around the corner, there was the abbot, who was rather a paunchy fellow, and so in no time at all, the demon just devoured him and slicked his lips and flowed. And after he'd had a good feed, he went racing up to the mountains and resumed his place in his den, quite happy. And then the final story that comes to mind is about this prince. Now, his father, the king, was rather an enlightened king, and he brought along a learned sage to teach his son. And the learned sage said to the prince, "You must become a master of the 5 weapons." Now, to this end, a tutor who was indeed a master of these weapons was found in a far distant place. So the prince was sent off there to come under his tutelage. Now the prince stayed there for some years, and he became a master of the mace, a master of the sword, a master of the saber, and a master of the bow and arrow. And after he'd mastered these 4, the tutor said to him, "Well, now it's time for you to go back to your kingdom." But the prince said, "But what about becoming master of the 5th? And the master said to him, "This will be presented to you by life. Now be on your way." So the prince, taking the road back, was told that there were 2 routes back to his kingdom. But he was advised that in one route there was a forest in which there was a great demon, and anyone who entered that forest would be devoured. Now, the prince was anxious to return back to his kingdom because he'd heard that his father, the king, was ailing. So he decided, having mastership, to take the route through the forest. As he came into the dense trees and made his way along a barely perceptible path, all of a sudden a great shadow appeared to come nearer and nearer to him. As it approached, you could feel the tremendous power and force of this creature. And as it came closer, the prince observed this great mass. He was frightened. He was quaking in his boots. But he decided to use the mastership that he'd achieved. So he took out his mace. And as the mass creature loomed closer, he swung his mace around and around. But with a final swing, the mace stuck like glue to this great, monstrous, demonic appearing mass. So then he took out his sword and lunged at the creature with his sword, but this too stuck to the massive monster. He took out his saber and swung it with all his might, but it too stuck to the creature. He took out his bow and arrows, and each arrow merely stuck to the side of the creature like some Christmas decoration, until finally he had no sword or mace or saber or arrows with which to fight. So, lunging himself at the huge monster, he found himself stuck, fighting with all his might to release himself from this monstrosity. He could hear the laughter of this huge beast. But then suddenly the prince remembered what his master had said, and a great calm came over him, and he remained totally still. The monster stopped its laughter, and it could be clearly heard to say, "Why are you no longer fighting me?" And the prince replied, "I have gained the fifth mastership, the fifth weapon." Stories in this amazing place, this vessel, like a cauldron that allows us through our meditations to go beyond our mind into the place where the chemistry of life melts, to bring forth the knowing, the understanding, the answers. What is it that arises for you as the energy of this place stirs the chemistry to allow it to come forth? Awareness, knowing, understanding, answers. What arises for you? What bubbles up from this vessel? Anger, the holy demon in the fire weapon.
Not to struggle against life and fight life.
Okay.
That we're just capable of just doing whatever it is in front of us.
Yeah.
sometimes gives change. Brings change.
Right. So what is this fifth weapon that comes, that we find here and now, along with the answers?
Being still and present in this moment.
Letting go of fear, calmness.
Yes. Because what we have here, we have in life also, isn't it? Thank you, Michael, for inviting us.
Thank you.